I was standing in the security line at the airport the other day, shoes in one hand, laptop in the other, shuffling forward in my socks on that gray industrial carpet. And I looked around at the fluorescent lights, the plastic bins, the tired faces, and I just thought, this is a bus station.
It is. It's effectively a logistics processing center. That is what modern air travel has become. It's all about efficiency, volume, throughput, and, safety. It is completely utilitarian.
Exactly. It's just a means to an end. But the reason we're here today, and the reason I pulled this massive stack of history books, financial reports, and old flight manifests is because it wasn't always like that. There's a specific window in the 20th century where an airline wasn't just a company. It was a vibe. It was a cultural icon. And at the absolute center of that universe was TWA, World Airlines.
The airline of the stars.
The airline of the stars. And that is not just some marketing fluff. We're talking about an airline that was owned by Howard Hughes, arguably the most eccentric, famous billionaire in American history. We're talking about terminals that look like sculptures from the future. We're talking about a brand that effectively taught America how to be global citizens.
It was, for a very long time, the gold standard. For a large part of the mid-20th century, TWA was effectively the second unofficial flag carrier of the United States, right there alongside Pan Am. If you were flying internationally in the 1950s or 60s, you were likely on a TWA Constellation or a 707. It really did represent the projection of American soft power abroad.
And yet, and this is the hook, this is the real tragedy we have to unpack today, this company, which was founded by aviation pioneers and owned by the richest man in the world, ends up being sold for parts. He goes from the Lindbergh line to a financial carcass picked clean by corporate raiders in the 1980s and 90s. How does that happen?
It's a dramatic, almost Shakespearean rise and fall. And what we're going to do in this deep dive is trace that entire arc. Because TWA isn't just a story about planes. It's a case study in the tension between radical engineering innovation, massive celebrity power, and eventually just brutal, brutal corporate finance.
We have a massive stack of source material here to get through. We've got the corporate histories, the fleet manifests, the NTSB accident reports, and the bankruptcy filings. We're going to go through it all.
We're going to cover the glory days, the engineering breakthroughs that honestly changed physics, the fatal mistakes in the boardroom, and, of course, the tragic final chapters.
So let's rewind all the way back. Because TWA didn't start as TWA. It wasn't one guy with a dream in a garage. It was more like a shotgun wedding, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. A forced marriage. To understand the birth of TWA, we have to look at the year 1930. And honestly, to understand early TWA, you have to understand the mail.
The mail, like letters.
The U.S. mail. In 1930, the airline industry wasn't really about passengers. Passengers were heavy, they complained, they got airsick, they needed bathrooms. Mail sacks did not. The lifeblood of early aviation, the only thing that made it profitable was government airmail contracts. And the man holding the purse strings was the Postmaster General, a guy named Walter Folger Brown.
Okay, Walter Folger Brown. So he's the puppet master here.
He's the puppet master. Brown had a vision. He looked at the map of the United States and he saw this patchwork of tiny, struggling airlines flying open cockpit biplanes. It was chaotic. It was unreliable. He didn't want chaos. He wanted stability. He wanted 3 main transcontinental routes, a northern one, a central one, and a southern one, and he wanted big, robust corporations running them.
So he didn't just ask nicely for them to consolidate.
No. He leveraged something called the Airmail Act of 1930, also known as the McNary-Waters Act. He effectively forced a merger. He took a company called Transcontinental Air Transport, or TAT, merged it with Western Air Express, WAE, and then threw in a few smaller outfits like Maddox Airlines. He basically called them all into a meeting, which later got called the Spoils Conference, and said, if you want the lucrative Central Airmail contract, you are now one company.
You are now Transcontinental and Western Air, TWA.
Exactly. And while it was a forced marriage, you have to look at the DNA of the parents. It was spectacular. Let's look at TAT. They were already marketing themselves as the Lindbergh line.
Charles Lindbergh, as in the Charles Lindbergh, the spirit of St. Louis.
The one and only. Lindbergh was a technical advisor for TAT. He had actually surveyed the routes himself, having his name attached to your airline in 1930. It's hard to overstate. It would be like having, I don't know, the most famous tech visionary and the most famous pop star launch a company together today. It was instant credibility.
So you have the celebrity aviator on one side. Who was coming from the Western Air Express side of the family?
That brought in Jack Fry. And Fry is a crucial character in this story. He wasn't just a suit, he was a pilot's pilot, a barnstormer. An absolute operations genius. So right out of the gate, in 1930, you have the Lindbergh brand and the Jack Fry operational grit. It was a potent combination.
That's immediate street cred in the aviation world. So
Yeah.
they merged, they have the contracts. What was the product actually like for a passenger?
They wasted no time. On October 25, 1930, they launched one of the first all-plane coast-to-coast passenger schedules.
Now, I have to pause you there. When we say coast-to-coast in 1930, we aren't talking about a 5-hour flight with Wi-Fi and a movie.
Oh, no. We were talking about a 36-hour ordeal.
36 hours.
36 hours. And that was considered blazing speed. You have to remember the alternative was a train that took 3 to 4 days.
Right.
But here's the real kicker. They didn't fly at night.
Why not?
The technology just wasn't there. No reliable navigation aids, no lighted runways in the middle of nowhere. It was just too dangerous. So you would fly all day from the East Coast, land in Kansas City, get off the plane, they'd take you to a hotel, you'd stay overnight, get back on the plane the next morning, and fly the rest of the way to Los Angeles.
That sounds absolutely exhausting, but I guess compared to the train, it must have felt like time travel.
It was a revolution. But just as they're getting started, tragedy strikes. And this is one of those moments in history that pivots an entire industry. If this crash doesn't happen, modern aviation looks very, very different.
You're talking about the Newt Rockne crash.
Yes, March 31st, 1931. TWA Flight 599. It was a Fokker F-10 trimotor. It crashes in a field near Matfield Green, Kansas. It kills all 8 people on board.
8 people.
Yeah.
In today's numbers, that sounds like a small private plane accident.
Yeah.
But one of those people was very, very famous.
Newt Rockne, the legendary, iconic football coach of Notre Dame. In 1931 America, he was a titan. This would be like, imagine if a major NFL coach or a massive celebrity today died in a commercial plane crash. The media storm was intense. The public demanded answers.
And what were the answers? What brought the plane down?
The investigation revealed something terrifying. The Fokker F-10, like many planes of its era, had wooden wings. It was a wood structure covered in fabric and plywood. What had happened was that over time, moisture had seeped into the interior of the wing. The glue that held the wooden spars together had dissolved. It lost its integrity.
So the wing was literally rotting from the inside out.
Exactly. And during turbulence, the wing essentially just snapped off in flight.
Wooden wings. It sounds insane to us now, sitting here in the 21st century, but that was the standard, wasn't it?
It was. But the Rockne crash ended the era of wood and fabric for major passenger transport practically overnight. The public lost faith. TWA grounded their entire Fokker fleet. They were in a serious crisis. They needed a new plane. They needed metal.
So logic suggests they go to Boeing, right? Boeing is the big manufacturer.
They did go to Boeing, and Boeing had just developed the Model 247. It was the first truly modern airliner, all metal, retractable landing gear, sleek. It's the future. But there was a catch.
There's always a catch.
Boeing was part of a giant conglomerate called United Aircraft and Transport Corporation. Guess who else was in that conglomerate?
United Airlines.
Correct. So when Jack Fry and TWA knocked on the door and asked for the 247, Boeing basically said, sure, you can have some after we deliver the first 60 of them to our sister company, United.
Ouch. That is anti-competitive behavior 101. So TWA is grounded, their reputation is taking a massive hit because of the Rockne crash, and their main competitor has an exclusive lock on the only modern plane in existence.
Right. Backed into a corner, TWA did something bold, something that would define the company for decades. Jack Fry and his team wrote up a spec sheet and sent it to several smaller manufacturers. They sent it to a company called the Douglas Aircraft Company. At the time, Douglas wasn't a huge player in civil aviation, and TWA gave them a list of demands that was incredibly ambitious. They basically said, we need a metal plane that is faster than the Boeing, carries more people, and, most importantly, can take off on one engine from any airport in our system.
Why the one-engine rule? That seems specific.
Safety redundancy, born directly from the trauma of the Rockne crash. They were flying over the Rocky Mountains and the high desert. They specifically mentioned the route from Winslow, Arizona to Albuquerque, which had some very high elevations. They needed to know that if an engine failed over the mountains, the plane wouldn't just drop out of the sky.
So they forced Douglas to over-engineer it for safety.
Exactly. And Douglas delivered. They built the DC-1 for Douglas Commercial 1. It was a prototype.
Yeah.
Then they refined it into the DC-2. And eventually they widened it into the legendary, the iconic, the world-changing DC-3.
And the DC-3, I mean, that's not just a plane. That's an institution. That's the plane that changed the world.
It changed the physics of the business. Before the DC-3, airlines effectively lost money on passengers and made their profit on mail. The DC-3 was efficient enough and carried enough people, 21 passengers, that for the first time, an airline could turn a profit just hauling humans.
That is a massive shift. That's the moment it stops being a government-subsidized service and starts being a real, viable business.
And the speed. In February 1934, Jack Fry, remember him, the pilot executive, and Eddie Rickenbacker, another World War I ace who was then with Eastern Airlines, they flew the DC-1 across the country. They flew from Burbank to Newark in just over 13 hours.
Wait, hold on. Let me get this straight. In 1930, it was 36 hours with an overnight stop.
Oh.
By 1934, it's 13 hours, nonstop.
That is the pace of innovation we are dealing with. In 4 years, they cut the travel time by almost 2/3. TWA became the leader in technology and speed because they were forced to be.
Tragedy driving innovation. It's a recurring theme in this story. So TWA is recovering. They have these shiny new metal planes. They're the Lindbergh line. Things are looking up. But then we hit 1939, and a new character enters the chat. A very big one.
Perhaps the biggest character in 20th century aviation history. And again, it starts with Jack Fry wanting a new plane. He wanted to buy the new Boeing 307 Stratoliners.
What was special about the Stratoliner?
One word, pressurization. That is the key. Before pressurization, you had to fly low, usually below 10,000 feet.
Wow.
That meant if there was a storm, you flew right through the middle of the storm, you bounced around, people got sick.
The air sickness bag was a standard piece of equipment, not a precaution.
Exactly. Pressurization meant you could seal the cabin, pump it full of air, and fly over the weather at 20,000 feet. It was smoother, it was faster, it was infinitely more comfortable. Fry knew this was the next great leap forward, but the TWA board was conservative. They looked at the huge price tag and said no.
They didn't want to spend the cash.
Right. So Fry, incredibly frustrated with his own board of directors, goes to a friend, a fellow aviation nut with very, very, very deep pockets, Howard Hughes.
The Howard Hughes. The tool company fortune, the movie producer, the reclusive, eccentric genius.
Hughes listens to Fry, and he doesn't just cut a check for the planes. He goes out and starts secretly buying up TWA stock. He buys a controlling interest in the entire airline through the Hughes Tool Company. He effectively buys the airline so his friend Jack Fry can buy the planes he wants.
That's a power move. My boss won't let me buy this cool new toy, so my billionaire friend bought the company.
And suddenly, TWA isn't just a corporation. It's Howard Hughes's personal laboratory. And this leads directly to the development of the most iconic, most beautiful propeller plane ever built, the Connie.
The Lockheed Constellation.
And this is a great story of corporate secrecy. Hughes didn't just order this plane off a catalog. He and Jack Fry went to Lockheed and secretly co-developed it. Hughes demanded performance specs that everyone thought were impossible. He wanted a plane that could outrun a Japanese Zero fighter, outclimb a bomber, and carry 40 passengers in transcontinental luxury.
Why all the secrecy?
He didn't want Pan Am or United to know what he was building until it was too late for them to catch up. They worked under code names. It was a complete black project. And when they finally unveiled it, well, there's a famous flight in April 1944.
This is during the war. The plane's not for commercial use yet.
Correct. Technically, the first Connies were designated C-69 and went to the military. But Hughes wanted to show off what his baby could do. He and Fry got in the cockpit of a Constellation painted in full TWA livery, and they flew it from Burbank, California to Washington, D.C.
And how fast did they do it?
Under 7 hours. 6 hours and 57 minutes, to be precise.
7 hours. So it went from 36 to 13 to now under 7. We're getting close to modern jet speeds here, and this is in a propeller plane.
It averaged about 330 miles per hour. It shattered the existing transcontinental record. But more importantly, it was a publicity stunt that signaled TWA was no longer just hauling mail. They were now the undisputed luxury leader. The Constellation had these sleek lines, a triple tail. It looked like a dolphin or a shark. It was a sexy airplane.
And that really sets the stage for the next era. World War II ends, the economy booms, and TWA enters its golden age. This is the real Mad Men era of flight.
The late 1940s and the 1950s, this is when the Airline of the Stars moniker really becomes true, not just marketing.
Tell me about the Star of California flight. That sounds like the perfect example.
It is. February 1946. TWA launches its commercial Constellation service, the inaugural flight from Los Angeles to New York. The passenger manifest reads like the credits of a blockbuster movie. You add Cary Grant, Myrna Loy, Tyrone Power, Edward G. Robinson, William Powell.
Wow. Imagine being on that flight. The cigarette smoke, The clinking of martini glasses, the legroom. It was an event, not just transportation.
It absolutely cemented the brand. If you were a movie star, you flew TWA. If you were a business tycoon, you flew TWA. And Hughes, now in full control, pushed for international expansion aggressively. He wanted to encircle the globe. They launched service to Paris, Rome, Cairo, Tel Aviv, Bombay. TWA became the way America traveled to the world.
But, and there was always a but with Howard Hughes, all was not well in the boardroom.
No. This is where the eccentric part of the billionaire genius becomes a massive liability. Hughes was chaotic. He would disappear for weeks, sometimes months at a time. He would meddle in the tiniest details, like the shape of the silverware or the fabric on the seats, while ignoring massive, critical financial decisions. And Jack Fry, who was trying to run a functional airline, started clashing with him constantly.
So Fry wanted efficiency and a plan. Hughes wanted perfection or control or something else entirely.
Fry was concerned about the bottom line, about schedules, about logistics. Hughes was concerned about, well, about being Howard Hughes. In 1947, they had a massive falling out. The airline was struggling financially after the war. There were strikes, operational issues. TWA stock had tanked from a high of $71 down to just $9 a share.
Oof, that is a collapse. What caused such a dramatic drop?
A combination of post-war adjustment, a pilot strike, and just the sheer chaos of Hughes's management style. The airline was losing $20 million a year. Hughes put more of his own money in to save it, but he used that leverage to force Jack Fry out of the company he helped build.
That feels like a major, major turning point.
It is a pivotal moment. The source material calls it the end of the airline run by flyers. Jack Fry was the soul of the airline. He was the guy who flew the planes, who understood the mechanics. When he left, TWA stopped being an airline run by pilots and started being an airline run by, well, by an absentee billionaire and his accountants from the tool company.
And that change in management, Hughes's complete control, led directly to the biggest strategic stumble of all, the coming of the jet age.
We all know the jet age was coming. The British had the de Havilland Comet. Boeing was secretly building the 707. Everyone in the industry knew propellers were on their way out.
Speed was the new currency. The game was about to change again.
Everyone knew this except, apparently, Howard Hughes' checkbook. He hesitated. He dithered. Pan Am, their arch rival led by Juan Trippe, jumped in with both feet. They placed a huge order for Boeing 707s and Douglas DC-8s. Pan Am launched jet service in 1958 and completely captured the market. Hughes just waited.
Why did he wait? Was he losing his touch? Was it the money?
It's complex. Part of it was his obsession with the details. He kept trying to redesign the jets on paper. He also had a preference for the Convair 880, which was faster but smaller. He was also becoming more reclusive, more paranoid. He was trying to play the manufacturers off each other, but all he did was lose time. By the time he finally placed a massive order in 1956 for 33 jets, a mix of 707s and the 880s, it was late. And it was incredibly expensive.
How expensive are we talking?
The total order cost was $497 million.
$500 million in 1956 money? That's an astronomical sum.
It was, and the Hughes Tool Company didn't have that kind of cash on hand. To fund the purchase, he had to go to a consortium of Wall Street banks and insurance companies. And the lenders had a condition, a very big one. They said, "We will lend you this money, but you, Howard, have to step back. You are too erratic. You are a risk we can't manage."
They put him in a timeout. They sidelined the owner.
Effectively. In the early 1960s, Hughes was forced to put his TWA stock into a voting trust, giving up control of the airline. He fought it in court for years, but eventually lost and sold his shares in 1966 for a massive profit. But the damage was done.
So the man who built it into a global icon ultimately choked off its future by waiting too long to modernize.
Exactly. It's the theme that haunts them. TWA had great engineering, great pilots, an incredible brand, but the financial management at the very top was erratic and unreliable. And that pattern, great product, shaky finance, haunts them for the rest of their existence.
So Hughes is out. We enter the 1960s. The Mad Men era continues. The jets are finally flying. But now we have a corporate guy in charge, a lawyer named Charles Tillinghast Jr.
Yes, and Tillinghast represents the shift to the corporate conglomerate style of the 60s. He wasn't an airline guy, he was a lawyer and a businessman. He looked at the airline industry and saw that it was brutally cyclical. Boom and bust. When the economy is good, people fly and you make money. When there's a recession, the planes are empty and you lose your shirt.
So he wanted to hedge his bets, smooth out the earnings.
Precisely. He thought, let's diversify. Let's create a holding company, Transworld Corporation, and buy businesses in other industries. And this is where the list of companies TWA bought it gets weird.
It gets very weird. I was reading the list in the source material, and I had to double-check I was looking at an airline history.
Right. So the holding company bought Hilton International. Okay, that makes sense. Hotels and airlines, there's a synergy there. But then they bought Canteen Corporation, a vending machine company, and then they bought Hardee's.
Hardee's, the fast food burger place.
The burger place. And then, the strangest of all, they bought Century 21 Realty.
So in theory, you could fly TWA to a conference in Europe, stay in a TWA-owned Hilton, get a snack from a TWA vending machine, come home, buy a house through TWA Century 21, and grab a burger to celebrate at TWA's Hardee's.
That was the corporate dream of the 70s. It was all about smoothing out those revenue streams. If the airline is losing money, maybe the burgers are selling. But what it also meant was that management focus was diluted. They weren't just running an airline anymore. They were running a sprawling, disconnected conglomerate.
But even with all this corporate distraction, the airline brand was still innovating on the customer-facing side. I read they were the first airline to introduce in-flight movies, all the way back in 1961.
They were. And they invested heavily in design and image. This brings us to perhaps the most visible, beautiful legacy of TWA that still exists today, the TWA Flight Center at JFK Airport in New York.
Oh, the Aero Serena Terminal. It's iconic. It doesn't even look like a building.
Opened in 1962, it's that swooping, concrete, bird-like structure. It looked like the future had landed. It was pure optimism in concrete form, designed to capture the glamour and excitement of the jet age.
I've walked through it since it became the hotel. There are almost no right angles. It feels organic, like a sculpture.
Saarinen wanted to capture the sensation of flight before you even got on the plane, but, and here's the design tragedy of TWA. While they were building architectural masterpieces in New York, they were making a massive, massive infrastructure mistake in the Midwest. Let's talk about the Kansas City hub.
This is a fascinating case study in a brilliant design idea meeting a brutal new reality. TWA's main base was in Kansas City for a long time. They helped design the new Kansas City International Airport, KCI. And the design philosophy was revolutionary. Drive to the gate. What did that mean exactly?
The idea was ultimate convenience. You would drive your car, park right outside your gate, walk maybe 100 feet, and you were on the jet bridge. No long terminals, no trams, no miles of walking, just curb to plane.
That actually sounds amazing. Why don't we have that everywhere?
It sounds amazing for 1965 when it was designed, but the airport didn't open until 1972. And what happened in the late 60s and early 70s?
Hijackings.
Hijackings. The hijacking epidemic, mostly to Cuba, changed everything in aviation. Suddenly, you needed centralized security checkpoints, metal detectors, X-ray machines for bags.
And you can't put a full TSA-style security checkpoint at every single gate door along a horseshoe-shaped terminal.
Exactly. The drive to the gate design made centralized security physically impossible. They had to retrofit these awkward, ugly glass walls and tiny checkpoints into the skinny terminal corridors. It was an operational disaster. The terminals were too narrow for the crowds, connecting flights were a nightmare. The design was obsolete the day it opened.
So TWA has this brand new hub that is fundamentally broken.
Correct. And because of that massive inefficiency, they were eventually forced to move their main domestic hub to St. Louis in the early 80s. They abandoned their dream in Kansas City because the world had changed around their design.
So we move into the 1970s, and the 70s were tough for everyone in America, but especially for the legacy airlines.
It was the perfect storm. First, you had the introduction of the Boeing 747 jumbo jet. TWA bought a lot of them because Pan Am did. They didn't want to be left behind again. But the 747 is a huge, huge plane to fill.
Nearly 400 seats.
Then the 1973 oil embargo hits. Fuel prices skyrocket. So now you have these massive planes that guzzle fuel, flying half empty because the economy is in a recession. It was a recipe for losing money.
And then the knockout punch. 1978. The Airline Deregulation Act.
The game changer. We have to explain this briefly because it's so important. Before 1978, the government, an agency called the Civil Aeronautics Board, or CAB, set the routes and the prices. Airlines competed on service, the quality of the steak, the freeness of the champagne, the legroom. It was a protected, regulated utility.
It was cozy for the big players.
Very cozy. After 1978, the gloves came off. Anyone could start an airline, fly anywhere they wanted, and charge whatever the market would bear. New low-cost carriers like People Express and Southwest popped up. Vicious price wars began.
And TWA, with its high costs, its powerful unions, and its older gas-guzzling fleet, they were incredibly vulnerable.
Extremely vulnerable. They had a high cost structure from the regulated era. They couldn't compete on price with the new non-union startups. The source material mentions a really telling detail about their desperation in the mid-70s, even before deregulation. In 1975, they were so poor, so desperate for cash, they sold 6 of their prized 747s to the Imperial Iranian Air Force.
The Iranian Air Force.
Yes, this was pre-revolution Iran under the Shah. They sold them for a fraction of their value. It was a fire sale. They were selling the crown jewels just to make payroll that month. It was a sign of deep, deep trouble.
That brings us to the 1980s. And this is where the story shifts completely from engineering and glamour to pure Wall Street bloodsport.
The corporate raider era.
In 1983, the holding company, the one that owned Hardee's and Hilton, decides the airline is a drag on its profits. So they spin it off. They basically say to the airline, you're on your own, good luck.
TWA was now an independent company again, for the first time since Hughes bought it. But it was starved for capital, loaded with debt, and flying an aging fleet. And in the Shark Tank of the 1980s, a weak company is blood in the water.
And two of the biggest sharks in the water start circling. Frank Lorenzo and Carl Icahn. And this is a fascinating and ultimately tragic bit of labor history.
It really is. First, you have Frank Lorenzo. He was the head of Texas Air and Continental, and he was known as a fierce, ruthless cost cutter. The unions absolutely despised him. They called him the ultimate union buster. He had a history of using bankruptcy laws specifically to void union contracts and slash wages and benefits.
So the TWA employees see Lorenzo making a bid for the company, and they panic.
Complete panic. And then the other bidder emerges, Carl Icahn.
Carl Icahn was a different kind of animal. He was a financier, a corporate raider. He didn't know how to run an airline, but he knew how to buy undervalued stock and extract value.
So the TWA unions, particularly the pilots union, ALPA, and the machinists union, IAM, were faced with an impossible choice. Lorenzo or Icahn.
A choice between the executioner you know and the complete unknown.
It was a true Sophie's choice. They looked at Lorenzo and saw certain doom for their contracts and their careers. They looked at Icahn and thought, maybe we can work with him. He's just a finance guy. He wants to make money. He doesn't have this personal vendetta against unions like Lorenzo does. So in an incredible move, the unions actually supported Icahn's takeover. They went to him and offered massive concessions, deep pay cuts to help him finance his bid to buy the airline and fend off Lorenzo.
They invited the vampire into the house because they were afraid of the wolf at the door.
That is a very, very apt analogy. Icahn takes control in 1985, and for a brief moment, there was hope. But then, in 1988, he makes his move. He takes the company private.
Let's unpack taking it private. What did that actually mean for TWA's bank account? Because this is the moment.
This is the critical moment. This is where the airline is financially murdered, even if the body keeps flying for another 12 years. When Icahn took TWA private, it was through a leveraged buyout, an LBO. Essentially, he used the airline's own credit and assets as collateral to borrow the money to buy the airline from the public shareholders.
So the airline itself pays for its own purchase.
Correct. TWA, the company, took on all the debt. According to the source, the deal was structured so that Icahn personally made $469 million in cash profit from the transaction.
Almost $500 million in profit for him personally.
And TWA, the airline. TWA was saddled with $540 million in new, crippling debt.
So he walks away with the cash, and the airline is left holding a massive mortgage it can't possibly afford.
A mortgage with enormous interest payments. The airline was now drowning in debt service. To raise cash to pay that debt, Icahn started doing what raiders do. He started selling assets.
Asset stripping.
And in 1990, he sold the single most valuable thing TWA owned, the routes to London Heathrow.
To American Airlines.
To American Airlines. Selling the Heathrow routes was like a Michelin-starred restaurant selling its kitchen. Those were the profitable, prestigious, high-yield routes. Those were the business travelers. TWA has spent 40 years building that market dominance. Once those were gone, TWA was effectively a domestic airline with a few flights to other European cities. The trans-world part of the name started to mean less and less.
It's just heartbreaking. They are selling the family furniture just to pay the interest on the rent.
And it gets worse. After he's loaded the company with debt and sold its best assets, he puts it into bankruptcy. But he's not done. We have to talk about the Caribou deal.
This sounded like a confusing legal mess in the notes, but when you look at the numbers, it's just shocking. Break it down for us.
So TWA goes bankrupt in 1992. It's the inevitable result of that massive debt load. Icahn is eventually ousted in 1993. The employees and creditors take over. But as he's leaving, Icahn negotiates a parting gift for himself, a poison pill.
He's leaving, but he's not done taking from the company.
Not even close. See, he had loaned TWA about $190 million during the bankruptcy to keep it afloat. TWA couldn't pay him back in cash. So they agreed to a deal with a new travel company Icahn set up called Caribou.
What were the terms of this deal?
The deal gave Caribou the right to buy any TWA ticket on any TWA flight, except for code shares at a 45% discount from the published fare.
45% off. Anything.
Yes, for 10 years. But here's the real kicker. Caribou could buy an unlimited number of these tickets and then resell them to the public. They set up a website, lowestfare.com, to do exactly that.
So, wait. Icahn's company could buy a ticket from TWA for $55, turn around and sell it to me for $80, keep the $25 profit, while undercutting TWA's own price of $100.
Worse than that, it meant TWA lost control of its own inventory and its own pricing. This is crucial in airline economics. Airlines make their money on something called yield management. They sell cheap seats early to fill the plane. Then they make their profit by raising the price for the last-minute business traveler who has to fly.
Right, the guy flying tomorrow for a meeting pays top dollar.
But with the Caribou deal, if TWA tried to raise the price on a popular route, say, St. Louis to New York, Caribou would just buy up all the seats at the 45% discount and sell them cheaper. TWA couldn't raise prices, they couldn't make money on the busiest flights because Carl Icahn was essentially skimming all the high-yield revenue off the top.
The source material says this cost them how much a year?
The estimates are around $150 million in lost revenue per year.
That is a bleeding wound you cannot possibly stitch up.
It was a ticking time bomb that Icahn left in the fuselage. The airline was trying to recover, trying to modernize, but they had this anchor dragging them straight to the bottom. They were essentially subsidizing their former owner's new competing business.
And speaking of tragedy, we are in the mid-90s now.
Yeah.
The airline is financially crippled. Morale is at rock bottom. And then comes July 17th, 1996, Flight 800.
A dark, dark day in aviation. TWA Flight 800, a Boeing 747, takes off from JFK, bound for Paris on a warm summer evening. Minutes after takeoff, it explodes over the Atlantic, off the coast of Long Island. All 230 people on board were killed.
I remember the news coverage of this vividly. It was on 2047. There were so many theories. A missile, a bomb, a terrorist attack.
The investigation took years. The FBI was involved, the CIA was involved. It was one of the most complex in history. But the NTSB eventually concluded it was a mechanical failure. A center wing fuel tank exploded, most likely caused by a spark from faulty wiring.
But while the investigation was happening, the narrative that formed in the media was absolutely devastating for TWA's reputation.
It was, because even before they knew the cause, the media focused heavily on one fact. This specific 747 was 25 years old. It reinforced the public perception that TWA was a broke airline, flying old, unsafe, clapped-out equipment.
The airline that can't afford new planes.
Exactly. Even though the age of the plane wasn't the direct cause, maintenance and design protocols were changed for the entire global 747 fleet after that regarding fuel tank and alerting the brand damage was done. It was seen as the old airline, the unsafe airline.
They tried to fight back, though, didn't they? I read in the late 90s they made one last big push.
Yeah.
They ordered a bunch of new planes.
They did. In 1998, under new management, they placed a massive order for 125 new aircraft. Boeing 757s, 767s, MD-80s. They were trying to refresh the fleet and the image. They even bought the naming rights to the football stadium in St. Louis. It became the Transworld Dome.
The home of the greatest show on turf, the St. Louis Rams. I remember that. They were trying to look like a winner again.
They were trying to project vitality. We are back. We are new. They had a clever promotion. Pay in coach, fly in first for flights through the St. Louis hub to try and fill up those premium seats. They were scrambling, trying everything to win back customers.
But with the Caribou deal still draining cash every single day, and the mountain of debt from the Icahn years.
It was too little, too late. The math just didn't work. You cannot outrun that kind of fundamental financial handicap.
So we arrive at the end, the 2000s.
January 2001, the third bankruptcy.
Third time is not the charm.
No. This time, it was the end of the line. American Airlines swoops in. They agree to acquire TWA's assets.
They didn't really merge in the traditional sense, did they? It was an acquisition of the parts, not the whole company.
Correct. A new entity called TWA Airlines LLC was formed just to facilitate the transfer of assets. The deal included a $745 million payment, but mostly it was about American taking the planes, the airport gates, and the routes. They didn't want the company, they wanted the stuff.
December 1st, 2001. The last day.
The last day. Flight 220. From Kansas City to St. Louis. It was a ceremonial final flight. The CEO at the time, Captain William Compton, was at the controls. It was a very emotional flight for the employees and everyone on board.
There is a detail in the source material about that night that really sticks with me. It's so final.
The sign removal.
Yeah. At 10:00 p.m. Central Time, employees at airports across the country started taking down the TWA signs, the red and white logos. By midnight, everything on the departure boards, all the gate signs, were changed to American Airlines.
It's a ghost town effect. 1 minute and 71-year-old American Icahn exists. The next minute, it's just paint and plastic being thrown in a dumpster. It happened, officially, overnight.
And for the thousands of employees.
It was brutal. American Airlines absorbed the airline, but then 9/11 happened just a few months later. The entire industry contracted violently. American laid off thousands of employees, and the former TWA employees, having the least seniority at the newly combined company, were often the first to go. The St. Louis hub, which was supposed to be a key asset in the deal, American eventually downsized it and closed it as a main hub in 2009. The massive Kansas City maintenance base closed in 2010.
So not only did the brand die, but the infrastructure and the jobs it supported were largely dismantled over the next decade.
It was a total erasure. If you go to St. Louis Lambert Airport today, you can still feel the phantom limb of TWA, but the massive operation that was once there is gone.
Right. It's not completely gone. And this brings us to the outro, the legacy.
You can't kill a brand that strong completely. It lives on in memory and nostalgia.
And in architecture, in a really beautiful way, the TWA Hotel.
Yes. The Aero-Serenen terminal at JFK, which sat empty and crumbling for nearly 2 decades, was meticulously restored. It reopened in 2019 as the TWA Hotel.
Have you seen photos of it? It's incredible. They have the old split-flap departure boards that go clack, clack, clack. They have the sunken lounge with the chili pepper red carpet. They even took an old Lockheed Constellation, one of the original Connies, and turned it into a cocktail bar on the tarmac.
It's pure distilled nostalgia. It celebrates the golden age we talked about in part 2. It freezes TWA in time, back when it was glamorous and exciting before the corporate raiders and the bankruptcies. It's TWA as we all want to remember it, not as it actually ended.
And American Airlines, to their credit, has painted a few of their modern jets in the TWA heritage livery over the years.
A nod to the history. It's nice to see the Twin Globes logo on a fuselage again, even if it's just a coat of paint.
So, as we wrap this up, what does this all mean? We started by asking how the airline of the stars ends up being sold for parts. What's the final takeaway?
I think the answer is that TWA was an airline defined by romance and engineering.
Yeah.
It was built by pilots like Lindbergh and Fry and eccentric visionaries like Hughes. They cared about speed, altitude, and style. They pushed the envelope of what was physically possible with an airplane.
But they lost the war on finance.
They were ultimately dismantled by financial engineering. Hughes's critical delay on jets cost them their market lead. The 70s diversification distracted them, and then the leveraged buyout in the 80s hollowed the company out from the inside. The Caribou deal was just the final parasite that drained the last drop of blood. It was a death by 1,000 financial cuts.
It really raises a big question about these legacy businesses. Can you survive just on a great name and a great history?
No, not in an industry this brutal. The airline industry is unforgiving. It operates on razor-thin margins. If you don't constantly reinvent your business model, not just your planes, but your balance sheet, your cost structure, you die. TWA stopped reinventing the business and started just trying to survive the debt.
Here's a provocative thought to leave you with. What would the airline industry look like today if Howard Hughes had bought those jets 5 years earlier? Or what if the employees in 1985 hadn't picked Icahn?
If they had accepted their fate with Lorenzo.
Yeah. It would have been brutal, but would TWA in some form still be flying today? Or was it just destined to become a beautiful relic of a more glamorous bygone time?
That is the billion-dollar what if. Maybe there just isn't room for that kind of glamour anymore in a world of budget carriers and basic economy.
Next time you're at an aviation museum or maybe just walking through JFK on your way to that bus station in the sky, look for the Twin Globes logo.
Yeah.
It really stands for a time when flying was something special. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
Safe travels.